I still remember the golden sun of California that morning, the kind of warm light that makes you believe everything in life is steady and safe. But little did I know how quickly trust could be broken and how painfully friendship could turn into betrayal. My best friend, the one I had trusted for years, the one I had shared secrets and laughter with, ended up doing the one thing I never thought possible. She married my ex, and she did it behind my back without even telling me. For years, I had held on to our friendship like a lifeline. We met in high school, two young girls who dreamed of escaping small-town struggles and chasing big California dreams. She was always full of energy, always ready with a joke, and I was the quieter one, the listener, the one who offered a shoulder when she cried. I never thought that one day those same shoulders would carry the weight of betrayal. My ex and I had been together for years. It wasn't a short, fleeting romance. It was one of those relationships where people assumed marriage was the obvious next step. We went through ups and downs, of course. We were young, and sometimes our tempers clashed. But I loved him deeply, and when we finally broke up, it was one of the hardest decisions of my life. My best friend was the first person I ran to. She sat with me, held my hand, and told me I deserved better. She promised she'd never let me cry alone. What I didn't know was that while she was wiping my tears, she was already letting her heart wander where it never should have. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She still called me every day, we still met for coffee, and we still laughed at the same silly things we always had. But slowly, little signs began to appear. She'd sometimes cancel plans, saying she was busy, but I would later hear from others that she had been out. She grew secretive, glancing at her phone during conversations and quickly tucking it away when I asked. Still, I pushed away the nagging doubts in my heart. I thought, no, she would never hurt me like that. Not her. Time passed, and one day I noticed something that shook me deeply. I saw my ex's car parked near her apartment building. I told myself it must be a coincidence. Maybe he was visiting someone else. Maybe he was just in the area. But the coincidences kept piling up. One evening, I called her, and her voice sounded nervous, rushed. In the background, I could hear a laugh I knew too well. It was his laugh. My stomach sank, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to accuse her of something so unthinkable. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But then the truth came out in the most brutal way possible. I didn't hear it from her, not even from him. I heard it from a mutual friend who casually mentioned that they had gotten married. Married. Without telling me. My heart stopped, and my whole world spun in that moment. I asked my friend to repeat it, hoping I had misheard. But no, it was true. My best friend, the girl who knew every detail of my heartbreak, the girl who promised she'd stand by me, had not only taken my ex but had vowed to spend her life with him, and she hadn't even had the courage to tell me herself. I felt crushed, like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My chest tightened and tears burned my eyes. It wasn't just about losing him. I had already let him go. What broke me was losing her, losing the friendship that I thought was unbreakable. It was betrayal on two fronts, and the pain was sharper than I can ever describe. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at old photos of us together, pictures of two smiling girls, arms around each other, dreaming of the future. Now those dreams felt like ashes in my hands. I wondered if she had ever truly been my friend, or if all those years had been a lie. Did she comfort me after my breakup because she cared, or was she already planning to step into my place? The questions swirled in my mind, but the answers only led to more heartache. My world felt smaller, lonelier. Trust, something I had always given freely, now felt impossible to offer again. And yet, even in the depth of my pain, I couldn't bring myself to hate her completely. I wanted to, but a part of me still remembered the girl who once stayed up all night with me before exams, the girl who held me when my parents fought, the girl who promised we'd always be sisters. I didn't know how to reconcile the friend I loved with the woman who had betrayed me. All I knew was that life in California didn't shine as brightly anymore, and the warmth of that sun I once cherished now felt like it burned. In the days that followed, I felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to fully grasp the reality of what had happened. My phone was quiet, unusually quiet, as if the silence itself was mocking me. She didn't call, she didn't explain, and he certainly didn't reach out. It was as though they had both erased me from their new lives together, like I had never existed in their world. At first, I kept expecting her to show up at my door, to knock with tears in her eyes and tell me that it wasn't true, that someone had misunderstood, that she would never do this to me. I held on to that foolish hope for a while, thinking maybe there had been some mistake. But as the days stretched into weeks and not a word came from her, the truth became undeniable. She had chosen him, and in choosing him, she had abandoned me. My nights became the hardest. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything. I remembered the night I first introduced them, how he had smiled politely at her, how she had teased me, later saying he was handsome. I brushed it off then, not realizing how significant that moment would become. Now I kept wondering if that was when it all began, if maybe a seed had been planted that slowly grew in the shadows of my trust. The betrayal consumed me, but alongside the pain was a strange, heavy shame. I felt foolish for not seeing the signs sooner, for trusting too deeply, for believing that loyalty was as sacred to her as it was to me. People around me began to notice the change in me. My coworkers asked if I was all right. My family worried that I looked pale and withdrawn. But how could I explain to them that I wasn't just dealing with a breakup, I was dealing with the death of a friendship that had been a part of my very identity? When you lose a friend like that, it feels like losing a piece of yourself. I decided one afternoon that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I needed answers, even if they broke me further. I sent her a message, just a simple one, I know. My hands trembled as I hit send. Minutes passed, then hours, and still no reply. My heart pounded with every second of silence, until finally, late that night, her response came through. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. That was all she wrote. No explanation, no attempt to soften the blow, just those cold words that confirmed everything. I stared at the screen, my chest tight with anger and sorrow. I wanted to scream at her, to demand how she could betray me like this, but the words wouldn't come. All I managed to type back was, "You should have told me." And that was the end of it. She didn't reply, and I didn't reach out again. After that, I heard about them only through whispers in our community. People talked, of course. California may be big, but circles of friends are small, and everyone loves a piece of gossip. Some pitied me, others avoided mentioning it altogether. I could feel the weight of their pitying glances whenever I walked into a room. I hated that. I didn't want to be the girl who was betrayed. I didn't want my pain to become entertainment for others. So I did what I could to hold myself together. I buried myself in work, spent hours walking along the beach trying to clear my mind, and forced myself to smile when people asked how I was. But inside I was unraveling. I thought about confronting him too. I thought about asking him why, after everything we shared, he could so easily replace me with someone who knew all my secrets. But I realized it didn't matter. His betrayal hurt, but hers cut deeper. He was my past, but she had been my present, and I thought my forever. One evening, I sat on the pier watching the waves crash against the shore, and I let myself cry freely for the first time in weeks. The ocean swallowed my sobs, and in that moment I realized that I wasn't just mourning the betrayal, I was mourning the loss of innocence. I would never look at friendship the same way again. I would never give my trust so freely, but in that realization, a small seed of strength also began to grow. Maybe this was life teaching me that not everyone you love will protect your heart. Maybe this was a painful lesson in letting go. Still, it hurt beyond words, and I knew the journey of healing had only just begun. The weeks turned into months, and yet the wound inside me did not heal the way I thought time would allow it to. People often say, time heals all wounds. But I learned that some wounds don't heal. They simply become scars you learn to live with. California, with its sunny skies and endless beaches, seemed almost cruel to me then. How could the world be so bright when I was carrying so much darkness inside? Every familiar street carried memories. Every cafe or park reminded me of days we had shared together. Me, my ex, and her. We had been a trio once, laughing, joking, spending weekends together. I used to joke that he and she got along almost too well, never knowing that joke would one day turn into my nightmare. Whenever I walked past the places we used to go, it felt like the walls whispered back at me, reminding me of the betrayal I couldn't erase. I kept asking myself questions that had no answers. Did they start seeing each other while he and I were still together? Was every laugh we shared back then secretly hiding their guilt? Did she ever truly feel guilty, or did she justify her actions by convincing herself that love made it acceptable? These questions spun around in my head endlessly, and no matter how much I tried to silence them, they came back each night when the world grew quiet. I would sit alone with my tea, staring at the shadows on the walls, wondering if she ever thought of me at all. The thing about betrayal is that it changes the way you see yourself. I began to doubt not just her, not just him, but also me. Was I not enough as a friend? Was I not enough as a partner? Did I drive them together somehow without realizing it? These thoughts ate at my confidence. I used to be a strong, independent woman with dreams. But suddenly I felt small, invisible, unworthy of love or loyalty. That was the cruelest part of betrayal, not just the act itself, but the way it poisons your sense of self. There were moments when I wanted to confront her face to face, to let her see the pain she had caused me. I imagined myself standing in front of her, my voice steady, telling her exactly how deeply she had wounded me. But whenever I thought about actually doing it, I froze. Because I knew, deep inside, that nothing she said would change what she had done. No apology could return what I lost. Words couldn't unbreak trust once it had been shattered. So I kept my distance, letting silence be my shield, even though that silence sometimes felt heavier than words. Some nights, loneliness pressed down on me so hard that I almost picked up the phone to call her, forgetting for a moment what she had done. That was the hardest part, missing someone who had betrayed me, missing the laughter, the closeness, the bond we once shared, even though it was poisoned. I hated myself for missing her, but emotions don't follow logic. The heart remembers what it loved, even when the mind knows better. Then came the day I actually saw them together for the first time since I found out. It was at the grocery store of all places. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I heard her laugh. That laugh, so familiar, so sharp it cut through me like a blade. I turned my head, and there they were, walking side by side down the aisle, his hand brushing against hers, her eyes shining in a way I once thought they only did when we shared our secrets. For a moment, the world stopped. My hands trembled. and I felt like the air had been stolen from the room. They saw me too, and for a second our eyes locked. She froze, her smile faltering, and he looked away quickly as if ashamed. None of us spoke. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even pretend. After what felt like an eternity, I turned and walked out, leaving my cart behind. My heart pounded all the way home, tears spilling down my face. That encounter broke something inside me, but strangely, it also gave me clarity. Seeing them together, seeing them living the life they chose, made me realize that they had already moved on without me. They had made their decision, and no amount of pain, anger, or questioning on my part would change that. They were building a new story together, and I was not a character in it anymore. That realization hurt deeply, but it also began to free me. Because once you accept that someone has chosen to walk out of your life, you can finally start to close the door on them. I spent the next weeks focusing on myself in ways I hadn't before. I started taking long walks along the beach at sunset, letting the waves remind me that life keeps moving forward no matter what happens. I signed up for a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for. Working with clay, molding something broken into something beautiful, felt like therapy for my soul. I even began journaling, pouring out my thoughts onto paper so they didn't suffocate me inside. Little by little, I felt pieces of myself returning. Not the same pieces, but new ones, stronger ones. Still, healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong, ready to forgive and let go, and other days I felt raw and broken again, as if the betrayal had happened only yesterday. I reminded myself that this was normal. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about learning to carry the pain without letting it control you. Slowly, I started to believe that I could. One night, as I sat on my porch, watching the stars above California sky, I whispered a promise to myself. I will not let this betrayal define me. I will not let their choices destroy my capacity to love or to trust again. They may have stolen my trust, but they will not steal my future. I didn't know then what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope in my chest. A tiny light, fragile but real, reminding me that even after the darkest nights, the sun always rises again. As time passed, I began to realize that life after betrayal is a journey of learning how to live with emptiness, then slowly filling it again with new meaning. At first, the emptiness was unbearable. I would wake up in the mornings and instinctively reach for my phone, half expecting a message from her like before. For years, she had been the first person I spoke to every day, sending me silly pictures, asking what I was doing, or making plans for the weekend. Now, the silence of my phone felt like a heavy weight pressing on my heart. It wasn't just about losing a friend. It was about losing the daily comfort of knowing there was someone who cared about the little details of my life. That was gone, and I had to learn how to stand on my own. It wasn't easy. There were days I felt strong, like I was finally moving forward, and then there were days when I collapsed into tears over the simplest reminders. I remember one afternoon when I went to a bakery we used to visit together. The woman behind the counter recognized me and asked, "Where's your friend? I haven't seen you two in a while." My throat tightened, and I couldn't bring myself to explain. I just smiled weakly and said, "She's busy." Walking out of that bakery, I broke down right there on the sidewalk, the pain of reality crushing me all over again. Betrayal has a way of finding you in unexpected places, reminding you of what you've lost when you least expect it. But slowly I began to rebuild. I realized that if I stayed trapped in my sorrow, I would let them win twice. First by betraying me, and second by stealing my happiness forever. I didn't want that. I wanted to take my life back, even if it meant starting from the ground up. So I began investing in myself. I joined a local book club, even though I was nervous about meeting new people. I signed up for yoga classes, where I found peace in the slow, deliberate movements that calmed my restless mind. I started cooking again, experimenting with new recipes, filling my home with the warm smells of fresh bread and spices. These small things might sound simple, but to me they were acts of survival, tiny steps toward reclaiming my life. Still, no matter how much I tried to focus on myself, memories of her would creep back in. I remembered the nights we stayed up late talking about our dreams, how we promised to stand by each other no matter what. We once said we would be each other's maid of honor when we got married. She knew everything about me, my fears, my hopes, my scars, and she still chose to turn all of that into a weapon by taking what mattered most. That was the part that cut deepest. It wasn't just losing a boyfriend. It was losing someone who had sworn to protect my heart. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the California sunset, I realized that forgiveness was going to be the hardest part of this journey. Not forgiveness for them, because truthfully I didn't feel ready for that yet, but forgiveness for myself. I had to forgive myself for trusting the wrong people, for ignoring the signs, for giving so much of my heart to people who didn't value it. It wasn't easy. Self-blame is a heavy chain, and it took me months to even begin loosening its grip. But as I stared at that sunset, I whispered to myself, "You were not wrong for loving. You were not wrong for trusting. Their betrayal says more about them than it ever will about you." That became my mantra. Whenever the shame crept in, whenever I felt foolish for being blind, I reminded myself that kindness and trust are not weaknesses. Betrayal doesn't make you weak. It makes the betrayer unworthy. And little by little, I started to believe it. Months later, I ran into another old friend who told me something I didn't expect. She said, people are talking about them. Not everyone sees their marriage as a fairy tale. Some say it started in lies, and lies have a way of catching up. I didn't know if it was true, and honestly, I didn't want to know. For the first time, I realized their lives no longer mattered to me. What they did, how they lived, whether they were happy or miserable, it wasn't my story anymore. My story was about me, about how I would grow stronger, how I would choose not to let bitterness consume me. One of the turning points came when I decided to travel on my own. I had always wanted to see the redwood forests in Northern California, so I packed my bags and went. Walking among those towering trees, I felt small, but not in a painful way, in a humbling way. Those trees had stood for centuries, weathering storms, fires, and time itself, yet they remained tall and unbroken. In their presence, I realized I too could withstand the storms in my life. I was still standing, and that meant something. When I returned home, I felt lighter, not healed completely, but stronger. I began to notice small joys again, the sound of rain against my window, the laughter of children playing outside, the way a good book could pull me into another world. I was no longer just surviving. I was starting to live again. And with each passing day, I felt the grip of betrayal loosening its hold on me. I won't pretend that it was an easy journey. Healing never is. There were nights I still cried, mornings I still woke with a heavy heart. But over time, those moments grew less frequent. And as I stood one evening watching the California sky turn shades of pink and orange, I made another promise to myself. I will never let betrayal harden my heart. I will protect my kindness because it is who I am. And though I may never fully forget what happened, I will not let it define the rest of my life. And so, slowly but surely, I began to walk into a new chapter, one where the pain of betrayal was no longer the center of my story, but just a part of it. A part that taught me, shaped me, and ultimately made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. Rose, that's part 4, about 1,000 words. There comes a time after betrayal when the raw pain starts to quiet down, but the echo of it lingers like a shadow. That was where I found myself as the months stretched on. The sharp sting of shock had dulled, but the ache remained, a steady reminder of what I had lost. It was strange to think how much of my life had revolved around her and how empty it felt without her presence. She had been my companion through so many stages of life. School days, heartbreaks, family struggles, and suddenly she was gone, not because life naturally pulled us apart, but because she chose to leave me behind. That choice haunted me more than anything else. I started to notice how betrayal changes the way you see the world. I became cautious, even suspicious of people I once trusted. If someone laughed at my stories, I wondered if they were mocking me behind my back. If someone offered kindness, I questioned whether it came with hidden motives. That was the cruelest gift my best friend had given me, a heart that now carried doubt. I hated that because deep inside I wanted to trust again. I wanted to believe in goodness. But rebuilding that kind of faith in people was like trying to put shattered glass back together. The pieces never quite fit the same. One day, I was sitting in a cafe by myself, sipping tea, when I overheard 2 women talking at the table next to me. They were laughing, sharing stories about their friendship, promising to stand by each other through everything. I smiled at first, remembering what that felt like, but then my chest tightened and I had to look away. It hurt too much to see what I had lost. It was like watching a reflection of my past, a reminder of promises that had been broken. I left the cafe quickly, tears stinging my eyes, and for a moment I wondered if I would ever feel that kind of bond again with anyone. But life has a way of placing new people in your path when you least expect it. Around that time, I joined a small community group that met weekly to volunteer at local shelters. It wasn't something I did to make friends. I did it because I needed to fill the emptiness inside me with something meaningful. But to my surprise, I found myself surrounded by people who were genuine, people who gave without expecting anything in return. One woman in particular, named Clara, became someone I grew close to. She was kind, patient, and never pushed me to share more than I was ready to. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt the faint stirrings of trust again. It wasn't the same as before. I wasn't ready to give my whole heart, but it was a start. Clara once told me something I will never forget. She said, "Sometimes the people we thought would be with us forever are only meant to be in a chapter of our story, not the whole book." Those words stayed with me. For so long, I had clung to the idea that my best friend would always be part of my life. Letting go felt impossible because she had been so deeply woven into my story. But Clara helped me see that just because someone is part of your past doesn't mean they deserve to be part of your future. That realization gave me a strange kind of peace. Still, I couldn't deny that I often wondered about them. Her and my ex, were they happy? Did their marriage bring them joy? Or was it built on cracks of guilt and secrecy? I never asked, never sought answers, but the questions floated in my mind late at night. Part of me hoped they were miserable, that karma had caught up with them. But another part of me, a softer part, simply hoped they were at peace, because carrying hatred inside myself felt too heavy. I didn't want to waste my life being bitter. I wanted freedom, and freedom meant letting go, even if it hurt. One of the hardest days came when I found an old photo album tucked away in my closet. It was filled with pictures of me and her. Beach trips, birthdays, late-night study sessions. Our smiles were so genuine, so full of love, that I broke down crying. I sat on the floor, hugging that album to my chest, grieving not just the betrayal, but also the friendship we once truly had. Because for all her mistakes, I knew what we shared had been real ones. That truth made the betrayal even sharper. But as I wiped my tears, I realized something important. It was okay to grieve the good times. It was okay to cherish the memories while still moving forward. Not everything had to be thrown away just because it ended in pain. Slowly, I began to feel a shift inside me. I was no longer asking, "Why did this happen to me?" but instead, "What can I learn from this?" I learned that loyalty is rare, and when you find it, you should treasure it. I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are capable of hurting you the most, but that doesn't mean everyone will. And most of all, I learned that I am stronger than I ever thought possible. As the months turned into a year, I found myself standing in front of the mirror one morning, looking at my reflection. My eyes still carried a trace of sadness, but I also saw resilience there. I had survived something that once felt unbearable, and though the scar would always remain, I realized I could carry it with pride, because scars mean you endured. They mean you lived through something that could have broken you, but you didn't let it. And so, even in the golden sunlight of California that once mocked me, I began to see beauty again. The sunsets looked softer, the waves seemed gentler, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet hope settling into my heart. I didn't know what the future would hold, whether love or friendship would find me again, but I knew I had taken the hardest step, choosing not to let betrayal define my life. By the time a year had passed, I realized that betrayal is not something you ever fully forget, but something you learn to live with, like a scar etched into your soul. The pain no longer consumed me every day the way it once did, but it still had its moments, creeping up when I least expected it. Sometimes it came in the form of dreams, where she and I were laughing together as if nothing had ever gone wrong, only for me to wake up with tears on my pillow, reminded that those days were gone forever. Other times it came in the form of silence, when I would pick up my phone and instinctively think of sending her a message before reality stopped me. Those moments were small, but they were sharp reminders of what had been stolen from me. Yet, as much as the pain lingered, so did something else, growth. I had grown in ways I never thought possible. Before all of this, I used to think I couldn't live without her friendship, that she was a piece of me I could never replace. But life had shown me that even when someone you love betrays you, you are still whole, still capable of standing on your own. That realization gave me a quiet kind of strength. I also learned to be grateful for the people who stayed, the ones who didn't betray me. My family, though sometimes distant, had been there when I needed them. The new friends I made through volunteering reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. Clara, especially, became a steady presence in my life. She had a way of listening without judgment, of reminding me that healing doesn't have to be rushed. Once, when I admitted to her that I sometimes still missed my old friend, she didn't shame me or tell me to just get over it. Instead, she said softly, "It's natural to miss what you loved, even if it hurt you in the end." Those words comforted me because they gave me permission to feel without guilt. But even as I healed, there were moments when anger bubbled up again. One evening, I saw a photo of them online, smiling, holding hands, looking like the picture of happiness. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My mind screamed, "How dare they smile after everything they did to me?" For a moment, the bitterness threatened to swallow me whole. But then I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded myself of the promise I had made. I would not let their choices steal my peace anymore. Their smiles did not erase my worth, nor did they define my future. They were simply living the life they chose, and I was living mine. As more time passed, I began to think less about them and more about myself. I discovered hobbies I never knew I enjoyed, gardening for one. I started with a small pot of flowers on my porch, and before long, I had turned my little backyard into a sanctuary of color. Every morning, I would water the plants and feel a sense of purpose. Watching something grow under my care reminded me that life could still flourish after loss. In a way, my garden became a reflection of my healing heart. Slow, patient, but blooming nonetheless. I also started journaling every night, not just about the pain, but about gratitude. I wrote down 3 things each day that made me smile, no matter how small. A kind word from a stranger, the warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of rain tapping against the window. At first, it felt forced, but over time it became natural. Focusing on gratitude helped me shift my perspective. Yes, I had been betrayed, but I was also alive, breathing, and capable of finding beauty in the world around me. That was something no one could take from me. There was one evening, though, that truly tested how far I had come. I was at a mutual friend's gathering, and to my surprise, she and my ex were there. My heart nearly stopped when I saw them walk in. For a moment, I considered leaving, but something inside me told me to stay. I had avoided them for too long, and maybe this was the universe's way of testing me. Throughout the evening, I kept my distance, but eventually our eyes met. She gave me a small, hesitant smile, as if seeking forgiveness. I didn't smile back, but I also didn't glare. I simply looked at her, calm and steady, before turning away. In that moment, I realized something powerful. I no longer needed anything from her, not an apology, not an explanation, not closure. I had already given those things to myself. That night, as I walked home under the California stars, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of her betrayal like a burden on my shoulders. Instead, I was carrying it like a lesson, one that had shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As the months rolled on, I noticed that I no longer cried when I thought of her. I no longer felt anger when I saw their faces. What I felt instead was distance, as if they belonged to another life entirely, a life that no longer had power over me. I realized that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean you let someone back into your life. Sometimes forgiveness is simply the act of releasing yourself from the chains of pain. And that's what I had done. I had set myself free. Looking back now, I see that her betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me to grow in ways comfort never could have. It taught me the value of self-love, the importance of boundaries, and the truth that not everyone you call friend deserves the title. It taught me that I can endure heartbreak and still find reasons to smile again. And so, as I sit here today, telling you this story, I do not feel bitterness anymore. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, gratitude for the strength I discovered, and gratitude for the chance to begin again. California's sun feels warm again, not harsh. The ocean sounds soothing, not sorrowful. And in the quiet moments of my life, I feel peace blooming inside me, steady and strong. As the years went by, I began to understand that betrayal, no matter how sharp, doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the turning point, the place where a new chapter begins. Looking back now, I see that what once felt like the greatest loss of my life was, in truth, the doorway to something greater, freedom, strength, and a deeper understanding of myself. At first, it was survival. I was simply trying to make it through each day without breaking down. But slowly, without even realizing it, I was building a new life brick by brick. A life not defined by who betrayed me, but by who I became after the storm. I remember one particular afternoon when I was sitting in my little garden, the one I had built after everything happened. The flowers were blooming in every shade, yellow, red, purple, and the sun cast a warm glow over the petals. A butterfly landed on one of the blossoms, and I felt tears sting my eyes. But this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude. In that quiet moment, I realized that I had survived the fire and come out stronger. My heart, though scarred, was still capable of beauty, still capable of love. People often ask me now if I ever forgave her. The truth is yes, in my own way. Not because she asked for it, not because she deserved it, but because I needed peace. Carrying anger would have chained me to her forever, and I refused to give her that power. Forgiveness, I learned, is not about excusing the betrayal. It's about freeing yourself from it. So yes, I forgave her, but I never let her back into my life. Some doors, once closed, should remain closed. And as for him, the man I once loved, I realized with time that I no longer carried any feelings for him at all. What I once thought was love had long faded, replaced by the clear knowledge that if he could betray me so easily, then he was never truly mine to begin with. His chapter in my story had ended, and I no longer felt the need to reread those pages. The most beautiful part of this journey was discovering myself again. I began traveling, something I had always dreamed of but never had the courage to do. I visited the redwood forests again, this time not as a broken woman seeking healing, but as someone who wanted to marvel at the beauty of the world. I walked the trails with a steady heart, breathing in the cool air, feeling small beneath the towering trees. But this time it didn't scare me. Instead, it reminded me that I was part of something vast and extraordinary, and my story, though painful at times, was still worth telling. I also opened myself to new friendships, though carefully. I learned that trust should be earned, not given blindly, but I also learned that there are still good people in this world. Clara became one of my closest friends, and through her I met others who showed me what true loyalty looks like. Slowly, I built a circle of people who didn't just stand by me in easy times, but held my hand in the hard ones. That kind of friendship, I realized, was what I had deserved all along. One day, years later, I saw her again, my old friend, the one who had betrayed me. It was at a farmer's market. She looked different, older, her smile dimmer than I remembered. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected the old pain to rise inside me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt calm. She gave me a small nod, almost like an unspoken apology, and I nodded back. That was all. No words, no confrontation, just two people acknowledging the past before walking in different directions. And that was enough. In that moment, I knew I had truly let it go. If there is one lesson I carry with me now, it is this: betrayal will break you, but doesn't have to define you. You can choose to let it harden your heart, or you can choose to let it teach you. I chose the latter. I chose to believe that even though some people will hurt you, others will heal you. Even though some doors will close, new ones will always open. And even though scars remain, they can be symbols of survival rather than weakness. So here I am, years later, telling you this story not with bitterness, but with strength. My best friend married my ex without telling me, and yes, it broke me once, but it also built me into who I am today, a woman who knows her worth, who knows that she can stand alone, and who knows that the California sun still shines beautifully, even after the darkest storms. Life goes on, and so did I. And if you are listening to this, carrying your own pain, I want you to know that you will go on too. Heartbreak may bend you, but it will not break you forever. There is always another sunrise waiting, always another chance to begin again. And sometimes the greatest gift betrayal gives you is the strength to finally write your story for yourself.